Good morning. Philosophy of fear. Ism. This is a book by Suba. The following points, he says, have been presented to sum up the discussion. Number 1. Fear was taken to be a negative factor yesterday throughout human history. It has been negatively interpreted in many religious texts, philosophies, and literary texts. Fearism has a positive perspective towards it. Number 2. Like Marxism and existentialism, fearism interprets both life and the world. Number 3. Fear existed yesterday. It exists today, and it will exist tomorrow. He goes on, Suba, Nepalese literary writer, philosopher, poet, who I met in 2014, to say that fearism exists as a theory. And in order to interpret fearism, we have to study all aspects of fear, its causes, its effects, its embeddedness in society, and in our way of thinking, and our behaviors, our attitudes. When I came to study fear myself in 1989, I had no idea that other people really were studying fear in the same way that I was interested in this very universal way, like Suba's book. He was brave enough to start a philosophy of fearism, to systematically begin to say, we've been talking about fear in human history, but we haven't given it a full philosophy itself. In other words, a philosophy to study fear so that we can better manage and understand fear. And his subtitle of the book really says, because this philosophy says life is conducted, directed, and controlled by fear. Is that a gloomy thing? No, as he says in his very first point, Suba says that fear is actually quite a positive thing. And so he makes a large case of that in the book. Today's video is not about the philosophy of fearism or an in-depth study of that. But I'm just wanting to show you some of the people who were involved in what I call the fearlessness movement. In other words, they are attempting to understand fear in a better way so that we can slowly move toward and along this path of fearlessness and growth. Some people might call that the path of waking up and awareness, of becoming a critical thinker, becoming a wise and compassionate person, and ultimately becoming fearless, enlightened, whatever that might be for you and how you define that. Another person on this path of studying fear who studied Suba's work, but he didn't know Suba nor my work prior, and this is Osunakachi Akuma Kalu from Nigeria. And he wrote this book just this last year, the first stages of the fearologist. And he was definitely very excited by both my work and Suba's work, my work being a philosophy of fearlessness. And I joined with Suba's in 2014 to create an East-West movement toward the study of fear. And I can use all of those terms, fearologist, fearism, fearlessness, and they have subtle meanings and differences, and that may or may not be important to some people. It is to people who want to be a professional fearologist, as we are training at the Fearology Institute, which I'm founder and director of. Topic today is really about seeing fear in the biggest way as you can see, actually creating a whole philosophy on understanding fear. Well, if I had a young person come to me and they say, Dr. Fisher, I've got all these fears. I'm afraid of failing my exam. I got a really bad mark the other day. Another person comes into my office and may say, I have a fear of being attacked on the street or being raped or losing my home because I've now unemployed. It's really hard to have a conversation to connect with people with those kinds of fears that are very true, very real for them and important for them. When, I say, well, okay, we could talk about those fears. We could use certain psychology principles. Lots of people have written about the psychology of fear, and that might help you to better manage fear, right? Because you want to better manage fear, right? Well, every one of you out there wants to, at some level, understand fear better and manage fear better. You want results. You want success. You want all kinds of things that are not unpleasant. You want things that are pleasant, comfortable, easier. And yet, Desh Suba, Osunakachi, myself, other teachers of the philosophy of fearism, Michael Anyeo in Nigeria, and many others, we're all saying, yeah, there's a positive side to fear, and we can learn from it, and it's also a great motivator for certain things. And then there's others of us that emphasize in our work that fear is also a very negative thing when it becomes connected to a chronic condition of fear, to a irrational condition, to a habit of being fearful of everything from the start and then trying to live your life avoiding those fears. And, Desh Suba goes to the point in the back of his book where it's pretty interesting what he does. He actually has pages and pages of all the different phobias that exist that are documented by psychiatric, psychological traditions. 300 or 400, I think, are named phobias. The ones like social phobia, fear of being evaluated negatively in social situations. Some you may not have heard of, like scriptophobia, fear of writing in public. Well, these are all very interesting, but not very helpful in another way to actually understand fear itself. So all of us who are doing the study of philosophy of fearism, philosophy of fearlessness, becoming a fearologist, and developing those skills as a profession, we are interested more in fear itself, how we've become afraid of ourself, our fearful self, to the point where we can even avoid coming to truth about ourselves in relationship to the world because we're kind of in a pattern of chronic fear running away from itself. And so it's very difficult to teach about philosophy of fearlessness, philosophy of fearism, as this very broad picture of how to come to understand this person who comes into my office who has fears. How is it applicable, right? How does it applicable to people who are living in poverty and starving and have a fear of dying because of starvation, have a fear that their enemy is going to be coming in through your village door and potentially killing you and others, or maybe already has in the past, and you have this ongoing fear that this is going to happen again. So even though we're talking about a philosophy, which means love of knowledge, philia, love of knowledge, philosophy. All of us who I've mentioned earlier that we are really interested in educating people around the world, not just how to avoid their fears and be positive and successful, but actually how to understand fear itself in all of the world, so that we can actually understand fear in other people, even fear in your enemy. Well, why would you want to understand fear in your enemy? Why would you want to understand fear in the entire world? Because we're all connected. All humans, all creatures experience fear in some way. And some of us, some of these creatures, some human beings experience fear and have learned how to handle fear, how to manage it, how to be acquainted with it, how to befriend it enough to make it become a positive movement, a positive energy. And how does it do that? Well, because fear will bring about the possibility for bravery, for courage. And eventually, fear can bring about the possibility of actually being a fearless person, fearless warrior in the world, which is a very different kind of warrior than one that is fearful. So we're looking at a very constructive, right, a very purposeful relationship that you can build with fear. So if you're just trying to get over your phobias, your panic attacks, your anxiety, and all the depression and other things that go with that, like these clients who want to talk to me or people who email me, the people I've mentioned in this video so far, we will encourage you to enter through the door of knowledge, through the door of learning. And it is a therapeutic door. It's a door that can bring healing. It's a door that can bring a new enlightened awareness of yourself, of fear, and of the world. Bigger picture to you and your fears. See, you and your fears is a very small picture. And in that small picture, you can put out the fire, maybe make it feel better, maybe take a certain pill, maybe practice a certain technique. Maybe it's meditation, yoga. Maybe it's a cognitive mind change that you change how you understand fear, your fears. You confront them. You do then something that's very brave and maybe courageous, so you don't let fear control you. You can do all those techniques. In our view, the people I'm speaking about who practice this philosophy of fearism, for example, we would say, well, that's putting out the fire. You're treating the symptom, the fire. And it's important to put out the fire. It's like first aid, right? You have to sometimes stop the bleeding first before you start thinking about all the other things that you can do to improve the condition or the emergency that's going on. So it's a good idea to practice first aid. Good idea to sometimes solve those symptoms and make the person feel more comfortable, in less pain, in less fear, right? You don't want them panicking and doing things that are irrational. You don't want to be doing that yourself. You want to be thinking really clearly. So we say that, okay, that's a good treatment, but it's small. And we have to look at, well, what are all the causes that are coming to that symptom that you want to bring comfort to? You don't want to have so much fear, for example. You don't want to have a phobia that you can't go into an elevator, or that every time you look at a person with a certain colored skin or from a different ethnic group, you get this immediate fear and traumatic reaction. But even if you have those feelings, even if you have what's called that emotion of fear, that raising heartbeat and nervousness, sweating, wanting to flee, wanting to fight and destroy that fearful enemy, even if that's an animal that you're afraid of, could be anything. And that's one of the things we know about fear is fear can travel to any object, anything, any place, because we hold the memory of our fears, because those memories are often associated, when we hold them, to a traumatic, hurtful event that happened in our past. Well, if you're in that small fear management practice and approach yourself, not saying it's bad, we're just saying that it's incomplete. It's a symptom treatment for the moment, right? Short term. Usually the problem is if that fear you take care of, you usually have more fears you have to take care, and then you have to do a treatment and a symptom for that fear, and then another one. 330 phobias have been recorded by psychiatrists, and all the different fears are endless, and they'll be around for probably ever. So we are interested here in our teachings on this philosophical approach to fear, which includes the psychological approach. It includes these spiritual and religious traditions of how to better manage fear, fear of death, right? Fear of life. Our teaching always comes back to, but what is your philosophy, right? Not just the small treatment. What is your growing philosophy in understanding fear in a new way? And again, as Suba says, we've been pretty negative around what fear is, and been pretty afraid of fear because it's negative, and because we're afraid of it, we sort of make it more negative, right? Because we're always moving away from it. If you were to learn this love, this philia, philosophic love for knowledge about fear, and we're not the only ones saying that, but we've put together some different ideas, and we're now writing more and more books and articles and giving talks around the world. Suba is really leading those presentations around the world on fearism. That we believe that it's that philosophical change and orientation to coming to know fear. What I often say is coming to know the fearful self. It's a great admission, right? It's something that brave people don't want to necessarily admit. Why? Because sometimes you get accused of being a coward, being timid. And so we try to act real brave and tough, like this teenager that might come into my office and he's trying to be real tough, and he's being violent, and he's hurting people, and he's hurting himself, practicing addictions and thinking he's real cool, or she's real cool. And yet all the time, what I look for is how is fear motivating all of that? Maybe some healthy, good fear motivating it, but I'm also looking at much bigger picture of the unhealthy fears that are motivating their aggressive, violent behaviors. And what in changing their philosophy of fear, in studying fear itself. So we've really changed around the idea that we should just get rid of fear. We're saying, well, no, we should understand fear. Understand thy fearful self. And as you understand your fearful self, The better and more deeper you do that, and it's lifelong to learn that. It never ends. But you will then have the skill and begin to have the awareness, an enlightened mind, opened heart to pursue with love the knowledge of other people and how they experience fear and how they can come to know fear better. And in that, as I say, they will come to know the spirit of fearlessness and will be then motivated by more and more choices that are motivated by the spirit of fearlessness. That's the good news, is that you can actually move along and get to know and bring in this spirit of fearlessness, which I've said before in many videos and teachings. It's probably 4 billion plus years old. It is a spirit that came with the origin of life. And again, that's a larger topic, but I've always said when fear appears, so then does fearlessness. And you don't get to fearlessness right away in terms of fully operating in fearlessness. Sometimes you have to just practice a little bit of bravery first, moving with fear and learning about fear and practicing bravery, which will emerge as part of the spirit of fearlessness. Yeah, bravery. Even timidity, right? Cowardliness is also the spirit of fearlessness, but not in a very healthy form. From bravery, then I say we can move into more courageousness, which is more interior, not just behavioral bravery, but actually more courageous moral thinking, which is not driven by so much selfishness, but a larger view of the better action, way of thinking, attitude for a better humankind and a better earthly world of care, health, sanity. And beyond courageousness, I even say the spirit of fearlessness will take another form, and I call that fear-less. This awareness that we just really are experiencing and reproducing way too much fear for any good living organism. And it's harming the planet in so many ways. So fearlessness is even what I call a more mature level of expression of the spirit of fearlessness. And then beyond that, I talk about a big gap. And to get to fearlessness itself in a really full, holistic, embodied being and knowledge that goes with fearlessness. A philosophy of fearism being part of that. A philosophy of fearlessness being part of that. That begins to move us to when we start acting in the world beyond fear-based motivations. At least more than 50% of our life is no longer being motivated by unhealthy, destructive, traumatic, hurtful fear. Sometimes called toxic fear. Sometimes I call it fearism T. Fearism like terrorism. Toxic form. So that's above 50% once we start moving into fearlessness, and then there are other stages which I simply classify as fearless. Okay, well, those are just giving you a bit of an idea of the complication and the difficulty of learning all these different kinds of forms of the spirit of fearlessness. The ground for this, if you want to walk this path, and I believe every human being wants this. They may not always know they want it. You may not know you want it. You may not even know how deeply you want to be moving on this path of freedom. What our colleagues, my colleagues that I mentioned earlier in the video, what we are focusing on is relearning knowledge about fear itself. And that means fear management. And that means all these steps of the path of fearlessness. Stages. We are interested in the relearning about that, relearning about our history of knowledges about fear, and how fear has often not been well known, or it's been even distorted, and how we know it. So that's the journey. If you want to come along and connect with us, to work with us, to study with us, to share with us even. That's the discussion. That's the kind of fear talks we're interested in having. Not all negative, right? That's the whole point. It's an incredibly positive journey that you can enter. And we're just saying that you can enter it, and we believe it's very important to relearn our knowledge of fear. So I repeat that. It needs to be repeated many times. I've learned this with the students in the Fearology Institute already, as I'm teaching it courses. I've learned it for decades. We need to repeat. We need to hear it again. We need to hear this new perspective, this new philosophy, this new way of framing our understanding of humans in relationship with reality, in the relationship with life and health and sanity, sustainability. A lot of people don't want to follow or come around that because they don't like the word fear. It brings up fear. It seems too negative. Even though we say, oh no, it's actually very positive. They'll still feel that. You know, I'd rather talk about peace and love and light and being a good human being and being kind and just being just. Well, all of us are also interested in that. Spirit of fearlessness itself is foundational to that, as we argue. So the last point I want to make in the video is about how difficult it is. So I want to say right now, as a teacher of this, as a learner of this path of fearlessness, philosophy of fearism, I want to say it's difficult. It is. I wish it wasn't so hard to learn and be disciplined to stay in that learning, to dedicate your life to it right to the end of your life, from as young as you can to as the day you leave this planet in your physical form. It's challenging, but as Osanakachi says in one of his quotes early on, he's citing Norman Vincent Peale, that when you get a big problem in life, let's say it's fear, it pushes you to big answers and pushes you to be a greater person. If you can stick in, keep on the discipline, keep on the path. Solve those little fears. Work with bravery first. develop courageousness, learn about those differences. Use the knowledge that we're creating, use our teachings that we're creating, and other people's teachings on fear. But be critical. So that's what I'm saying. We have to relearn because we haven't learned all that well, is my argument. And in that relearning, this is the key. We have to unlearn. Unlearn bad habits, bad knowledge, incomplete knowledge, distortive knowledge, and the values and attitudes, beliefs that go with those knowledges that are not so good. Not so good in developing a really critical, good philosophy of fearism, of fearlessness. All right, you don't have to become a fearologist. You don't have to be motivated by that desire like Osanakachi or others, myself. However, we encourage you, right? Encourage to take steps, even if they're little steps. We will help you if we can. We will do our best. I know we will. That's what we're all dedicated to. People I've mentioned in this video. To help you develop your own philosophy, your own unlearning and relearning. And that's uncomfortable. I can tell you right now, I know it is. From my own experience, from teaching people about this path. It has real big uncomfortable places that are even scary themselves to change, to do it differently. Right? Getting rid of habits, addictions, old ways that are no longer all that useful and seem to actually be self-destructive to you and others, to the planet. These are hard to change sometimes. But just because they're hard to change doesn't mean it isn't worth going. So that's what you have to decide. Is it going to be worth it? Right? Is it going to be worth that effort and discipline and having to study and unlearn and relearn? Can I trust those guys, those people who are teaching this? And what if I don't understand what they're teaching, right? As I get critiqued. We don't understand your work, Dr. Fisher. You're too complex, you're too technical. Please make it simpler. Well, there's more than one teacher. I'm not the only teacher. And we'll all develop different ways. Some of us will be more theoretical, philosophical. Some will be more practical and down to earth. I hope this video will introduce you to at least some really basic ideas of how you can come into working with the path. This path of awareness, enlightenment, toward our best human potential, toward our best beingness, beyond being human, to our spiritual self, in connection with all things, all beings. This is not just a humanistic project. I see this as a project, this path of the evolution and development of consciousness itself, which the great mysterious spirit somehow has given us this learning since the beginning of 4 billion years ago of life, and perhaps back to the origins of creation itself. Thank you, Creator. Thank you, consciousness. Thank you, knowledge. Thank you, philosophy. I welcome you to the path. Bye now.